Okay, picture this. It's the 1820s in Edinburgh, Scotland. The streets are heavily shrouded in fog, and there's this palpable sense of fear in the air. You see, medical science is advancing rapidly at this time, and prestigious anatomy schools are absolutely booming, but they're hitting a very real, very gruesome roadblock. To understand the living, anatomists desperately need the dead. Yet, by law, the only legal cadavers available for dissection are those of executed criminals. And the supply? Well, it just cannot keep up with the massive scientific demand. So it really begs the question, what happens when medical science needs bodies, but the graves are entirely empty?
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to walk through a dark, highly cinematic true crime journey right into the shadows of medical history. We'll be exploring the horrifying yet remarkably impactful tale of the men who decided to take supply and demand into their own lethal hands.
Part 1. A macabre medical shortage.
So back then, Europe and America viewed Edinburgh as this pristine pillar of medical training. But behind closed doors, a systemic crisis was brewing. Anatomists literally pleaded with Parliament to let them use unclaimed bodies from workhouses and charity hospitals, but their requests were just repeatedly ignored. And this desperate need for subjects created a terrifyingly lucrative underworld trade. To fill the void, a whole new profession popped up, the resurrectionists, or, as they were casually called, the sack-em-up men. These gangs would roam cemeteries in the dead of night, digging up fresh corpses to sell to anatomists. Families were so terrified of these body snatchers that they bought impenetrable iron coffins, installed heavy iron grates over the graves, and even hired guards. Graveyards practically became fortresses.
Part 2. The ghoulish duo emerges.
Now, deep in the squalid Westport slums of Edinburgh, two highly opportunistic men realized something chilling. Digging up graves, it was exhausting, incredibly dangerous work. Why bother battling iron grates and graveyard guards when the city was absolutely full of marginalized, forgotten people? Meet William Burke and William Hare. They were both Irish immigrants, mid-30s, living in these crowded, riotous tenement houses. And their descent into history actually began quite by accident. In November 1827, an elderly military veteran named Donald passed away in Hare's boarding house. Donald owed Hare £4 in rent. £4! And rather than forgive the debt, Hare decided to recover his losses in the most macabre way you could possibly imagine.
So Hare enlists his buddy, Burke, to help. Together, they open Donald's coffin, take his body out, and fill the empty box with tanner's bark just to mimic the weight. Then, under the cover of darkness, they cart Donald's body right to Surgeon Square and sell it to an assistant of a very renowned anatomist, Dr. Robert Knox. They were paid a really generous sum. But here's the absolute kicker. They were told that Dr. Knox would be more than glad to see them again when they had another subject. That single, lucrative transaction unlocked a terrifying realization for the duo.
Part 3. The Method to the Madness.
Burke and Hare decided to just cut out the waiting altogether. They rapidly escalated from simple opportunism to cold-blooded serial murder. Instead of waiting for people to die naturally, they started treating marginalized humans as pure inventory. In their own twisted coded language, they began referring to potential victims simply as a shot for the doctors. This led to an incredibly efficient, brutal method, which actually earned its own dark verb in the English dictionary later on, burking. The duo would target outcasts, invite them in, and ply them with copious amounts of whiskey until they completely passed out. Then, one man would block the victim's nose and mouth, while the other lay heavily across their chest to prevent any thrashing. It was essentially a direct-to-consumer pipeline of fresh bodies with zero visible marks of violence. For an anatomist, they were the perfect specimens.
And we really have to pause and remember the heartbreaking human costs here. They specifically preyed on the vulnerable. Take Mary Patterson, a young woman known around town for her beauty. After Burke and Hare murdered her, Dr. Knox was so captivated by her form that he preserved her body in whiskey for 3 months before even dissecting her. Then there was Jamie Wilson, a developmentally disabled beggar with a tuneful voice who was truly beloved by the community. When Hare and Burke attacked him, Jamie fought back like an absolute hero. But sadly, he was ultimately overpowered. When medical students immediately recognized Jamie's body lying there on the slab, Dr. Knox didn't report it. No, he simply amputated the boy's head and distinct feet to hide his identity. Knox completely, willfully ignored the glaring signs of foul play. The pacing of their murder spree was wildly compressed, too. From that very first sale in November 1827 to their final act in October 1828, Burke and Hare committed a staggering 16 murders. That's 16 lives extinguished in less than a year,
all just to feed the ravenous medical machine of Edinburgh.
Part 4. The Halloween Mistake. But, as we know, greed eventually breeds sloppiness. And that brings us to the climax of our story, the chaotic Halloween night of 1828. Burke had targeted an Irish woman named Margaret Docherty. He lured her to his apartment with fake promises of family connections and charity and got her severely intoxicated. The tension in that tenement that night was just suffocating. A drunken brawl actually broke out between Burke and Hare themselves. Docherty, who could barely even stand, tried to break up their fight. Neighbors literally heard the crashing, the wrangling, and most chillingly, a woman screaming murder right through the floorboards. But in that noisy, riotous neighborhood, no one intervened in time. Burke ultimately pinned the poor woman down, smothering her for 10 to 15 agonizing minutes until she died.
Now, the morning after, Burke was acting incredibly erratic. He was pouring whiskey all around his bed just to mask the scent of death. But a lodger staying with them, a woman named Elizabeth Gray, was innocently looking for her child's missing stocking. Reaching under the hay of the bed, her hand brushed against something cold. It was Margaret Docherty's limp, lifeless arm. In a total panic, Burke's partner Helen McDougall desperately offered the Grays a bribe of £10 a week to just stay quiet. But Elizabeth Gray bravely refused. She stated she would never touch money gotten with dead people, and she went straight to the police.
Part 5. A sensational betrayal.
So Burke and Hare caught wind of the Grays' discovery and frantically stuffed Docherty's body into a tea chest, rushing it right over to Dr. Knox's cellar. But the police were hot on their heels. When authorities finally opened that tea box, they found Docherty inside, her face bloodied and showing obvious, undeniable signs of suffocation. All 4 members of the household, Burke, Hare, and their wives, were instantly arrested. But prosecutors ran into a major wall. They lacked hard, undeniable evidence to actually convict them of the murders. So they did what desperate prosecutors do. They offered King's evidence, full immunity to William Hare, but only if he would turn on his partner. It was a spectacular, cold-blooded betrayal. Hare took the stand and coldly testified against William Burke, detailing exactly how his former friend committed the murders, while shamelessly claiming he merely sat in a chair and watched the whole thing happen.
Thanks to Hare's testimony, Burke was found guilty. And this brings us to a moment of just profound historical irony. In January 1829, standing before a massive, roaring crowd of over 20,000 people, William Burke was hanged. But his sentence didn't actually end there. By order of the court, his body was sent to the University of Edinburgh to be publicly dissected, literally the exact same fate he had forced upon 16 innocent people. The anatomist running the dissection, Dr. Munro, even dipped his quill into Burke's blood to write, noting for the record that the killer's brain was unusually soft. Crazy enough, Burke's skeleton is actually still on display at the university today.
Part 6. The Cost of Science.
So, why does all of this matter to us today? Well, because this macabre chapter forced a massive systemic reckoning in the medical establishment across Great Britain and Europe. The public was absolutely outraged. They finally realized that the underregulated, underfunded system of medicine was directly responsible for creating a market that openly rewarded serial killers. The sheer horror of those Westport murders finally broke the political deadlock in government. In 1832, Parliament passed the Anatomy Act. This was landmark legislation that officially expanded the pool of legal cadavers for dissection to include unclaimed bodies from charity hospitals and workhouses. By legally increasing the supply, the Anatomy Act successfully destroyed the black market once and for all. It ended the era of the resurrectionists and ensured that opportunistic ghouls like Burke and Hare could no longer murder for profit.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to take away from our explainer today. The rigorous anatomical knowledge that forms the very bedrock of our modern healthcare system was in part accelerated by shadowy figures operating in the dark corners of society. And it really forces us to ask, is the foundation of modern medicine built upon the bones of the marginalized and the forgotten? It's a grim ethical cost of early scientific progress, and without a doubt, a chapter of history we must never forget.